Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's virtual roundtable, Supporting Students. This program is part of a broader mental health series that ACUI is offering in partnership with NERSA and in collaboration with AU-CCCO. Your membership dollars fund today's program and all of our efforts in this space, and we sincerely thank you for your support and for being with us here today and every day. My name is Holly Stapleton, and I'm the Chief of Staff at the ACUI Home Office, and I'll be serving as your technical director for the program. Once again, today we have a really great group of professionals who will bring a variety of perspectives to this conversation. But before I pass the program to today's moderator, I want to go over a few quick housekeeping items. These virtual roundtables are designed in conversation format as opposed to a traditional webinar. We see these programs as an opportunity for all to engage and connect and really be an active part of the program. So please be ready and willing to offer your questions and insights along the way. We also recommend that you view this session in speaker mode. Throughout the program, you can submit questions using your Q&A button, which you can find on your Zoom menu. Again, please feel free to submit these as we go along. As you enter these questions and comments, please know that all questions are viewable to all attendees and panelists. If a colleague submits a question that you would like to be addressed, please be sure to upvote that question so it is flagged for us to ask live. The chat function is also available to you if you would like to make a point or ask things of other attendees. And finally, another function that you have available to you is the raised hand function, which will allow you to alert us if you're experiencing any technical difficulties. If you can see us and hear us okay, I'm going to ask that you please raise your hand now so we know that everything is working on your end. So let's jump into the program. I'm now going to pass the virtual mic to today's moderator, Chrissy. Chrissy?
Hi, everyone. Great to see you all. Again, I'm Chrissy Galley. I am the Staff Development and Student Experience Specialist for the Department of Recreational Sports at UC Berkeley. I also co-chair NERSA's Student Staff Development Task Force, and I am excited to be here with you all today and to share space. Thank you for taking time to be here with us today to discuss this super important topic. So what I'll do now is pass along to our panelists to introduce themselves. And as you introduce yourself, please share your role or perspective as it relates to today's conversation, as well as your personal pronouns. So Melinda, can you start us off?
Sure, I would be happy to. Hello, everyone. My name is Melinda Gilliam. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently serving as an area director at the University of Washington in Seattle, Washington. In my role as an area director, I'm a community manager and oversee both student staff and professional staff. Obviously, a part of that is supporting mental wellness and mental health of our residents and supporting our staff in kind of working to do the same. So yeah, excited to talk with you all today.
Okay, awesome. How about Tanika?
Hi everyone, my name is Tanika Santos. I also use she, her pronouns, and I am a fitness and wellness graduate assistant at the University of Kentucky, as well as the National Nurses Student Leader. And in both of those positions, I work a lot alongside our personal trainers and group fitness instructors. We also have several programs that align with our Exercise is Medicine initiative, which allows us to partner with counseling and our nutritional counseling as well. So that's super important, where we're connecting the physical body and the mental body. And yeah, that's just my space right now.
Great, thanks so much. Alex?
Hi everyone, my name is Alex Hart. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am really excited to be here all today. I am the area coordinator at Chapman University, which is a private university in Southern California. I did my dissertation on building a sense of community in residence halls before the pandemic, so it's a little different now. And so I'm excited to talk about different ideas for that.
Great. And last but not least, Becca.
Hi everyone, my name is Becca Ramp. I'm a clinical psychologist and our outreach coordinator at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington in the Counseling Center. I've been here almost, or actually coming up on 8 years, actually in the next week will be my 8-year anniversary. I'm also an adjunct faculty member I teach in honors. I created a two happiness courses, And I teach in our educational leadership program, which is our higher ed program, on helping relationships and helping theory. With my role, I'm also on our Healthy Hawks committee, which is with the Rec Center and with the Student Health Center around creating a holistic approach to well-being and getting the entire campus community involved in well-being as a whole, for everyone to play a role, and it not just be, of course, on the counseling center or rec or health center, that it's really everybody needs to be on board with being able to have different conversations and promote different messages as well. And I'm on the board for AECCO, and so representing our organization here today too.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you all so much. So undoubtedly, we and those on today's call are thinking about how we can support students in different capacities. So our staff, our residents, our participants, and there's many others additionally. Those are just some of the major buckets. So these students are concerned about, how their own health and safety, as well as their personal and academic concerns, are going to be met this year, knowing that this is very unique circumstances. With that in mind, what is the biggest challenge in supporting students' mental well-being right now? So both our student employees, as well as those who live in our spaces or utilize our programs. And Becca, maybe you can start us with that topic.
Yeah, I'd love to. It was really hard to, when thinking about this, it was really hard to pick one challenge, so I picked a few. So to kind of start too, this is mental health. You never know what's gonna get brought up during a conversation around mental health, so please take care of yourself. This is recorded. If you need to take a break or you need to tune out and come back to it later, you'll get the link, so you can always watch it later as well. But we have to make space for both. There are some people right now that are dealing with a pandemic, dealing with the unrest when it comes to racial injustices, of course, that's going on. That's got a new light on it, but not a new situation, of course. That there's just a lot happening. And for a lot of people, there were already a lot of adversity going on in their life. So there needs to be this idea that some people have a lot going on, and there's going to be some that really have some positives that have come up during this time, that have enjoyed extra time they've received with people in their life, that maybe really like more virtual programs because they're able to do more and feel more comfortable connecting virtually. So that's been interesting feedback we've received as well. So it's creating space for a both and. So just kind of wanted to start off saying that. So one of the challenges is adversity, and thinking about, there are a lot of students coming back with different things going on. It may be individual adversity, like adverse childhood experiences that already existed, that then they had to go back to a space that wasn't as safe during kind of quarantine time. Could be community, which of course is a lot of community. Could be community adversity like violence, poverty, different things going on in that way. And then there's also environmental adversity, which I'm in Wilmington. We just got hit by a hurricane 2 days ago, but we also just graduated seniors in May who had to evacuate for 3 different hurricanes. And then the way that they graduated, of course, was in the middle of a pandemic, and they were not here. So there's just a lot going on that people are carrying with them. And we're going to need to be in a space as staff members of a university or faculty or whatever role that you play, of being able to really talk about that in terms of tough conversations, real conversations, honest conversations, and being very aware of that. So some of the other challenges I thought of too were more of the counseling center. Everybody needs to be very, not just well-versed in referring to the counseling center, but being okay talking about mental health. We rely on visibility through outreach. So I rely on, you walk into Fisher, which is one of our student center buildings, and there's Becca and some therapy dogs, and you're gonna hang out with us, and you didn't even know we were there today, but we're gonna have fun, and you're gonna come over and get some candy and pet some dogs and talk about our services. So we rely on these kind of pop-up outreach experiences and workshops and all these things that can be kind of happenstance, and we're not gonna have that in the same way. So the counseling centers we use social media, so we may get a lot of attention in some ways, but have missed a lot of students because we don't have that visibility on campus like we're used to. And in other ways. So this is a time where everybody really needs to get on board with talking about and asking students about how they're truly doing in a very specific way, not how are you, but much more, I know that X, Y, and Z is going on, or that you left in this way. How has that been for you? And sharing about ourselves. So that's something that I thought of. And kind of the final thing that, see, this was hard to pick a few. Kind of the final thing is connected to loneliness. We know that loneliness has been on the rise, not just with this generation. It, of course, is the highest with this generation that is currently in college, but it's actually been on the rise for every single generation that exists today. So we know that that has only gotten worse in a lot of ways with COVID, and we have the data to show that. So it's really thinking about the three aspects of loneliness, which are emotional, which is individual, being connected with ourselves. Then there's social loneliness around having intimate, very personal, connected, vulnerable relationships. So those special, unique relationships. And then community loneliness is not feeling like you're connected to and involved in something bigger than yourself. All three of those are really important, and all three of them are being very impacted right now with all of the students that you listed earlier, Chrissy, with student employees, residence halls, and the ones who utilize our program, and with all of our staff and faculty on campus too. So that was probably longer than we wanted, but that's my story of that.
Yeah, I was going to jump in on the loneliness part. I mean, loneliness has been an issue before the pandemic, and this has only exacerbated the issue. I really do believe that this is a chance for us to rethink how we connect with people and how we connect digitally through a computer screen, and ways that we can help people to feel connected in some capacity, particularly in the residence halls. With students coming back, we're asking them to limit their contact, and we're asking them to limit their physical contact with people. How do we manage that and still provide opportunities for people to make friends for their first year students? How do we expect students to connect with one another that they haven't seen each other for a few months? We need to think differently on how we are kind of making those connections better for people. So that's going to be a huge challenge that I think that this time will present us a lot of good opportunities to make that happen. And so I'm excited to see what kind of comes out of this, in the sense of we can think about community in a different way. Is there ways that we can think about community a little differently to make that connection still? And then what that does for the future when things kind of go back, quote unquote, normal, that will help to alleviate some of these social isolations that we see a lot.
Yeah, Alex, I think that really aligns with one of the biggest points that I was thinking of, was distance and virtual interaction is very unique. And initially, I'm someone who really does like to interact face-to-face and making those personal connections. And I looked at the computer screen as a huge barrier. And having all these webinars and conversations, I've just realized there are so many people I would not have interacted with had this all not happened and had it not taken on a virtual path. And so for supporting our students in that sense is offering those opportunities and being able to engage and meet people where they're at. And I think that's something that Becca was mentioning about being able to personalize it in an authentic way, because not everyone is feeling the same way about what's going on. And I keep hearing this great quote that we're not all in the same boat, but we are all in the same storm. And so I think that brings a lot of humility as well. And as a student staff member who is also supervising students, there's a certain level of confusion sometimes of how much closer I am in age to these individuals, but I'm in charge of them, and how can I be my authentic self and still manage my authority. And I think being authentic and talking about our own personal experiences is probably the best way to open that door. Whether they choose to walk through it or not, again, is letting people do what they need to do authentically as well. So for me, it's just really about opening that space and working in a physical well-being area, and now moving more into this mental well-being integration for our students who are coming on campus, just providing as much certainty as we can in a lot of uncertain times, and having as much of a plan as is available. From what I've heard from students is they feel like there is something that they can be prepared for, and they have people who are willing to listen to them and answer their questions in that space of the reopening. I think a lot of people feel more comforted by that, even if it's not a perfect plan.
Yeah, I'd add into what you all have shared, I think, in different ways. about one of the biggest challenges in my perception is just the newness of this. I think we're all experiencing this for the first time in a big way. And as folks who are in the helper role or in the facilitator role of community, communication, connection, belonging, all those different pieces, it feels like we need to have the answers. When in reality, we are constantly adapting, and this has provided ample space and consistent challenge in figuring out how we adapt to be effective in supporting those and facilitating those components I mentioned earlier. So I think the newness is a big piece. The other thing I would add into the challenge is at a time where resources perhaps might feel a little bit more strapped than they typically would, it can be really tempting to overstep outside of a role. And for example, as an area director, I am not a certified mental health professional. That is not my role, and it would do a disservice for me to act in that way. And so really staying true to the areas and the scope of what my position is and focusing on doing those things really well will allow me to refer folks to the helpers who are most effective in that role. So yeah, I would say that might be a challenge as we move forward, but important to pay attention to.
Great, thank you all so much, and such valid and valuable answers. So we've touched a lot, I think, in the last answers on the virtual space and meeting the moment, and how there's the challenges that present themselves, in a virtual space. But how would y'all think that we ensure our student, staff members, and participants, residents, feel comfortable returning to site and in-person programming?
I think that's going to be a challenge. Students have their own idea of how to take care of themselves, and that is important to allow students to do that. We need to give students the autonomy to decide for themselves how they want to participate or they don't want to participate. So I'm a very practical professional. I think of things in the practical terms, and so one thing that I've thought about is there something that we can still offer both in person and digital? So for example, is there a way that we can record the events? Is there a way that we can live stream the event so that students have the options to choose what they want? I think giving students the options is really, really valuable for them to make choices for themselves, which is what we try to do in general in residence life and in counseling. We want to get students to make choices for themselves and understand the ramifications of those choices. So I think that's going to be key for programmers, for student staff to think about, is there ways that we can both do in person and digital to help students?
Kind of jump in too. I think we probably should have always done this in such a transparent, detailed way, but now especially to be incredibly transparent about what to expect when you show up to the physical space. So if they're taking temperatures, if there's going to be hand sanitizer, if it's already going to be set up to be 6 feet apart or more if it's a rec center space. But that very detailed, very transparent, very open and honest, this is what it's going to look like. This is exactly what you can expect whenever you get here. Some people are even doing kind of recording the space to be like, let me show you a sample. And that's how they're kind of promoting it as well through social media or through their website to show little snippets and what to expect, kind of clips, I guess. I was thinking about TikTok, which is a whole nother thing right now, but that people are using for promotion. But that would be really one that I'm thinking about, is really being honest. This is what you can expect. And it can feel like a lot when you write all of that down, and then this is what you can also still do. So trying to put that supportive, spin on it to say, you're still going to come and smile at people because we can see it in your eyes, even if you have on a mask, and you're still going to be able to get X, Y, and Z out of this event because this is what our objectives are. You're still going to be able to participate in these ways, connect with peers in this way, connect with staff, whatever. But being able to do both in that realm for physical space right now is certainly going to be very important. And one thing I think about, which I'll just throw out, is SAMHSA does a 6 different principles for trauma-informed practices. It's things like safety, trustworthiness, empowerment, peer support, collaboration, and then cultural integration. You can apply those 6 principles to anything, especially if you're creative. I've certainly applied them to every single kind of programming we've done on campus and that we've partnered with other departments in. So that's something too, that if you're really incorporating, just considering being trauma-informed because there's so much diversity in general, not just right now, that's something that you're really going to come out on top with these physical events, in-person events too.
Sorry, I have the train passing by in case you hear that in the background. But just because it was really aligning with what I was thinking and feeling is about being honest and having that kind of humility is really important. Because people feeling like they're not getting information is so frustrating. And I speak in the same sense of I get really frustrated if I feel like I'm not being heard. And from our students' perspective, I've definitely heard that if they're not getting the answers or at least some consideration, it's infuriating and it doesn't make them feel more certain about coming back. And so where I've been trying to kind of balance as a graduate assistant, you're sort of the liaison between professional staff members and student staff members. And this idea that we need to give a perfect plan or a complete image, like we don't want to say something and then it not be true. And I think being very authentic with there is a lot of uncertainty and plans may change, but this is the plan that we have now for you all is super important for letting people feel more comfortable returning to site. And then with that, just letting them know that continually through the process, we're going to be leaning on them to give us their perspectives and know that it's a malleable and transformable plan and it's not going to be thought without their perspectives involved as well.
Thinking about the transition that we made from being in person to being largely virtual, it felt somewhat stark and quick, like it just happened and we're virtual. And I think when we're considering what it would mean to return at some new level to an in-person format of programming or connection, I think about the middle steps. I think about how our students, how our residents become comfortable returning to being in our space or navigating and being present in our communities a little bit more. And so I think about programming or facilitated interaction in a way that allows them to geocache with a friend, but we still provide that programming and they're finding connection somewhere, but they're not yet easing fully into the like, okay, come with all the residents who live in the community or a large group of residents or even a smaller group, but you're not quite familiar. So thinking about what steps or how we can differentiate our program offerings in a way that lets folks kind of opt in where they're comfortable and then ease into that greater, larger, more familiar version of programming or connection that we've seen in times past.
Yeah, Melinda, that really sparked a thought for me is are there resources that are already free, like geocaching or other things that we can just capitalize? Maybe we've kind of shied away from it because it wasn't our thing or it wasn't, we didn't make it. But there's things out there that are already existing. There's different, you mentioned geocaching, and I think that's such a great opportunity for people to get out and go and explore instead of being stuck up in their rooms. So yeah, especially as resources decline, money or whatever it is for your department, finding different ways to do those things is going to be really, really key and really important.
I think one thing too that Tanika's answer brought up around giving that voice and choice to students is I should have said this earlier, but the counseling center, as many counseling centers chose to do for the fall, we're all virtual. The only in-person thing we have are emergency in-house appointments. But in terms of our outreach and all of our programming, we're all virtual. And that was because of feedback we received from students around feeling that they would be too anxious in person and they really want to get the most out of our events. So it's just easy to do those workshops or do live meditations and things like that online. That doesn't mean we're going to miss some events that we would have received before or that we would have provided before, but that's something too around get the feedback from them on what kind of events they even want to attend, that they're most comfortable attending, and just making accommodations. And then of course, I think we're all hopeful that we'll regroup and be able to go back to what we used to do in the spring.
Great, thank you. So that all is a really great segue into our Next question, which really has to do with something that I'm hearing a lot in the conversations that I'm a part of, and I'm sure you all are a part of as well, is this idea of building a sense of belonging and community in a physically distant space. So I know we've definitely touched on that through the geocaching and meeting people halfway, maybe through hybrid models of engagement and things like that. But Alex, would love to hear your thoughts initially on, what are you thinking about in building community and belonging, and what are some ways that we can approach that?
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge. It's definitely going to be difficult. For my institution specifically, we're going to be having one person, one bathroom model where you're going to be by yourself in a room. And so I've been toying with ideas around, is there ways that we can create some social bubbles? And if it's a floor that kind of sticks together and does their own thing, they come up with their own agreements and how they're going to, engage with one another, or engage with the outside community. And if there's ways that we can help as a professional staff can help support that, or can we schedule a time where they can go out and do something together, or can we provide resources for them to do that? Or can they go to the CAF together, or go get, something on campus as a team. So creating social bubbles might be a great idea that are interested to do things together, specifically around living together during these times, because outbreaks are a possibility. And so we want to limit that as much as possible. I think another thing that's really kind of important is to think about ways of communication and making sure, I think it was touched on earlier about making sure students have all the information, knowing exactly what is important or what they are needed and expected to do, and to just encourage people to reach out to one another. One of my favorite things to say is that you should be spending at least 15 minutes a day trying to connect with somebody, and really intentionally asking questions and engaging in conversation with the person for at least 15 minutes. So I'm really, I'm looking forward to this program that I'm going to be putting on. It's going to be more of a passive program on how to connect with people for 15 minutes a day. And so, if that's a phone call, if that's another Zoom call, if that is, just playing a board game or video games or something with people, some sort of connection with one another. And I think that is, that's really what I'm trying to do right now, is really just to think about how can I get people to just hang out a little bit and be safe.
I'm going to jump in on adding to what Alex was mentioning around wanting to create those spaces for people. Of course, when we think about it virtually, we think about, of course, using things like the small groups and breakout sessions. We use Zoom, so I always just speak to it from Zoom. But being able to intentionally create kind of those smaller spaces, support student organizations, and having whatever conversations that we typically would as mental health providers. We would typically do a lot of presentations and facilitating discussions with different students who just wanted that, or different kind of official student organizations. And now is really a time that we're trying to push those three aspects of loneliness and calling it what it is, and having those conversations around what we can do in each of those areas that I mentioned earlier, and really talking about belonging being this idea that you are there and welcomed as your true self and accepted as your true self, instead of fitting in, which is of course changing yourself in order to fit whatever mold. So one thing with ACCCO, we have quite a few providers who are leaning more towards doing, I think sometimes they call it mental health literacy, but it's a lot around debunking kind of toxic norms, right? This one would be that if you're not busy, then you're lazy in our culture, or that you have to look a certain way, you have to have a certain job, you have to have certain grades, a certain level of involvement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which we know just doesn't work for a lot of people. So this is a good time that I think that we can really have these conversations around this wasn't working for us, and it's not working for us now. It's making things a lot worse, while some people are feeling extra disconnected and that they don't belong because they're not used to not having the physical space. And we need to adapt that virtually. And so really taking the time to have the true conversations around what's really causing a lot of mental health concerns is really it's it's not that there's a good opportunity for a lot of positive right now, but this is a good opportunity to, for lack of a better word, for us to talk about what really causes a lot of problems in our culture.
And I do think that it really is an opportunity for some positive, which is, I have that tendency to go for the positive versus the realistic. But I do think that now that we have so many things that are coming to the forefront, mental health being one of the biggest ones that may not have been talked about before, and now it's, you know, people's everyday experiences who may have found a lot of different ways to avoid that or cope outside of that space. And now we have to spend a lot of times with ourselves and in our own heads. And so being able to, again, I keep going back to authenticity, but being able to not only sympathize, but empathize and say, I'm going through what you are going through in some capacity. So having that connection is so much deeper than just saying, I'm sorry you're going through this. And so I think that really does open the door for a lot of deeper conversations, whether, again, people are willing to take that or not. And what I've found is just being able to say, I am a safe space if you need a safe space with me. And always educating ourselves is another great way to do that, and not just only speaking from our experience, but also being able to speak from a place where there's been research in this area so that people can feel comforted by that as well. So.
Yeah, I would add that a lot of times I think some of our student staff, student leaders, even our full-time staff, you name it, we instantly jump to the assumption that we know what connection and belonging is for our residents. And I think taking a step back and finding a way that we can prepare our staff to understand themselves as a component at varying levels to connection and belonging for a lot of our residents, but maybe not all. And how can we take the time to understand what connection and belonging means for our residents? In my mind, I think to our individual interactions that our RAs are participating in with our residents weekly, and starting there, like, talk to me about where you're feeling connected and a sense of belonging, and having them take a moment and think about that. And some folks have the support networks they need, even in the midst of a pandemic, and that works for them, and that's wonderful. And then others feel very like they're just getting started and they might need some additional support. And then we start asking, talk to me about what you would find meaningful, and how we can, work together to make this happen. And seeing our residents as capable humans who sometimes might just need somebody to listen to them process, or might need them to kind of say, come along with me and let's do this. But yeah, connection and belonging can vary. And so I think positioning ourselves in a way as a resource to hear more and to help them cultivate their own understanding of that is important. Ultimately, connection and belonging in any sense is the goal, right? In the way that they find meaningful. And so if we can help them get there, whether or not that's through us as Res Life staff members, that's important.
Oh, and Melinda just reminded me of, we talked about a voice and a choice, but that also, even if you're an area director meeting with, we call them residence coordinators, but meeting with your RA and you do your one-on-one space, that giving them permission of what do you want this space to actually look like? What would it be that would be most helpful for our regular meetings? And we can always change that. Like, we call that like a supervision contract for clinical supervision for when we supervise somebody. But and I know that's different, of course, in other realms and other fields, but it could be something that everybody uses is really, I want you to have input, and then I want to tell you what's important for me in this space. And I can tell you exactly why this is important and something that I value in this space too. So even in that way, you could do that in, a bigger group of residents. You could do that with RAs, but definitely asking like what would be the most helpful thing, especially if it's going to be a regular space that's going to get them the most out of it.
Great, thank you. So I do want to take a moment for those who may have trickled in later to today's call and remind you of the Q&A opportunity. So if you have a question that you would like to ask the panelists, I highly encourage you, and thank those who have already submitted questions. So we will try and get to as many of those as we can throughout the session, and then towards the end of the session additionally. Also reminding you, if you don't have a question, or if you like a question that someone has proposed, go ahead and use the upvoting model as well. So again, thank you to those. And so one of the questions that I want to bring into the space that someone's presented is, and it goes along with this idea of creating community and and all of that. So how do you reintegrate a community after having spent time apart, right? So we're all, and I know we were, kind of just informally talking about this before we hopped on this call, is, we're in this space where we're going to be going from being physically distant to potentially, in closer proximity and still a physically distant space with others. So Melinda, would love you to share your thoughts initially, perhaps on, how do you reintegrate a community after having spent time apart, and then especially for those who maybe have voiced in their preferences that they are a little uncomfortable mixing with people again, engaging with others in a physically distant space.
Yeah, I'm excited because I think there's a lot of different ways that we can approach this, and maybe should be approaching it. And going back to what I mentioned earlier about the differentiation of approach and how folks might need different things to feel connected or to feel safe in taking those first steps of reintegrating and reconnecting. I would say that acknowledging what this has been and that it might have meant different things for folks, and maybe starting about hearing, what that's been like, and kind of forming that we have this shared experience, and it might have looked different for us, but it happened. And so I think that acknowledgement is important. It's happening. I shouldn't say it happened. It's definitely still ongoing. So, and then the next thing I would say is coming to a consensus that, we want to try and make something out of this. Hey, we're back in community, and what are the cool things about living in the halls and in the apartments and family housing? It's, the opportunity to be in shared community. And so what do we find valuable there, and how can we start working toward those things? Oftentimes we think of programming or some of the things that feel more traditional maybe to the experience, but again, this is our time to innovate. And I think we can listen a lot to our residents and learn from them, as well as innovate what we're doing and kind of get ourselves out of that rut of this is what we do because it falls at this time on the calendar. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to Melinda's point, this is the first time I've ever worked as a professional where there's something that's affected every single person, right? And so this is a good opportunity to really kind of capitalize on that, almost, of we've had this shared experience where we've had to experience something like this, and we need to kind of figure it out together. And so what a great way to build community by going through that shared experience and looking at it of we really didn't know what we were doing. We don't know what we're doing now, but we're going to figure it out together as a team, and we're going to be in this together. And I think that really does bring people together, at least in my experience. And so I'm excited about that opportunity. It's a little scary as well because I don't know what it's going to bring, but it's also, it really gives us an opportunity to, like Melinda said, really come together. And so I think that that's really unique in this position that we're in, to be able to create community for students is a challenge and a blessing at once.
I really appreciate that perspective too, because that's exactly what I'm thinking is a time of change, is really a time for new voices and new perspectives. And so I would like to think that's turning up the volume on our students' voices and getting their perspective. And I know for me personally, with some of these virtual offerings, it's very interesting how levels of comfort change behind a screen, for better or for worse. And I definitely feel like doing things like virtual counseling, I'm way more open than I was sitting in front of someone, because you don't feel like you're being as looked at. And I definitely think there's a lot of perspectives coming up in these spaces that I've also had to reflect on, because I am someone who will go right into that toxic positivity cycle. And so also being able to sit with someone and say, yeah, this really sucks right now. I'm sitting in this suck with you, and we're gonna be okay. Rather than just sugarcoating it as we do in fitness so often, of everything's gonna be fine and great, and just being like, wait, no, right now it really isn't. And that's okay. And I think that brings it back to what Alex was saying, is that creates more community. We can really connect on these levels, and it doesn't always have to be sunshine and rainbows. And by doing that through our communities, I think it opens a lot of spaces for us to have deeper conversations and probably more meaningful relationships.
And I'll just add that what everybody was talking about as well was this idea I was thinking about of just doing live events. And I know Alex mentioned earlier, I think that's great, of having that multiple, you can do live, you can do recorded, you can be virtual in or physically there. So many different options, and that's wonderful. But I was thinking about how we had a lot of faculty that had to make the choice or made the choice to do recorded lectures or to just do extra assignments, and that didn't work well at all with a lot of our students. They didn't feel connected when they didn't have that live option, at a minimum virtual live option, to connect and chat with each other, to take themselves off mute and ask questions. And so even how small that may sound and seem, but that reintegration piece of that, I actually get to talk to people in like a live setting, and that may be through chat. And it's really interesting. We did a lot of workshops towards the end, and I asked the participants, I would always ask them to share whatever they were doing that was really cool for self-care, for their mental health, in the chat box. And it was this progression of, at first they were only really excited and comfortable sharing in the chat box, but then once they all started sharing more in the chat box, then they started taking themselves off mute and everybody started talking. And so even that, like, I think that's that small integrated piece that we can bring people back, is just giving them those different options of connection. But that live piece of connection is needs to definitely be there.
I'd like to add a little bit regarding the virtual experience. I think generally the perspective that we talk about or we think about, we center the majority, right? We center the fact that, like, it's been a huge change for us, which it has for a lot of people, to move into virtual setting. And I also think about, and have had some conversations with some colleagues about the opportunity that virtual engagement has created for folks who now have access to connection in a way that they don't experience the same in an in-person format. And so just wanted to speak on that perspective and say, like, you know, so for some folks this is working well, and I hope as we shift to whatever new version of normal comes from this, we consider how we can continue to integrate virtual options and differentiate those approaches to programming and connection as well.
Okay, great. So circling back to this general thought of supporting students and their mental health and building community, it's kind of like a culmination of everything, the intersectionality, and also meeting the moment that we're in our country. You know, how, and this is open to all members of the panel, so I'm not gonna predetermine whoever wants to jump in. How are you preparing to address the issues of racism and anti-Blackness with your student, staff members, and participants or residents as we approach this new academic year?
I think I've been saying the same word, authenticity, over and over and over again, but I think it's just so key, especially on a lot of these issues where people are at different levels in their journey, in their path. Are they believing it's an issue? Are they educating themselves? Have they never heard of this before? Are they just discovering what their perspective is? And college is a huge time for that, where people are starting to discover themselves and the way they want to present themselves to society. So it's a lot to take in and a lot of big questions to ask. And I think, again, that personal invitation for me has been really important. And having those phone calls, again, someone mentioned getting zoomed out. And so sometimes having a phone call where you can sit outside or do something else where you're not looking at a screen can also help to feel like I'm actually sitting with this person and having a real connection in a moment. And then letting them know, I've been trying to balance this of not wanting to push people away or scare people away by thinking that I'm targeting them, but just letting people know, again, that I am a space and a confidant if they choose to use me, and if not, I'm going to be over here continuing to educate myself so that I can actually hold a conversation with a perspective that is thought out and not just coming from an emotional state.
I think for me, how I'm preparing for the inevitable conversation that's coming up is to listen. I mean, honestly, that is the number one thing that I believe that I can teach my students, my student staff, is to listen and support, and really just be there for any students that has questions or that wants to engage in advocacy or anything in that area. And so I think that is really, really vitally important for me to really think about how I can get out of the way and let students do what they need to do and be the advocates that they want to be. So I think that's really important for me to really consider in my own identities and my own power dynamics as well. I think the other thing is my department has committed to doing a lot of like educational resources and really give the opportunity to learn and to grow. And so we have kind of broken up into teams and done different like Instagram posts on our pages and things like that. And my team has really worked together to really just educate ourselves, to really provide opportunities to learn. And then that's going to translate when student staff come back. I think that we'll see a huge learning opportunity for our students to sit back and listen as well. So I'm looking forward to those conversations, because not only does it really help teach me, but I get to be an active and help students get to that point where they feel that they have a support system here for advocacy.
I would, I'm trying to think of all the different layers of this question too. The first list, I guess, that I'll mention, UNCW, I think like most institutions of higher ed, did the very typical higher ed thing. They have a task force, they have a committee, and they're doing all those things. So I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but from the counseling center standpoint, it is an area around all of us being anti-racist and making sure that we're very aware of our privilege, very aware of what we bring into the space as mental health providers, especially, and I can speak for myself, I'm a white Latina, but I am white passing in every way, and I'm aware of that. And that's very different than growing up with people who are not white passing. And so that brings a different level, visibility brings a different level of privilege in the room when it comes to mental health in all spaces. So when I'm doing an outreach as well. So being able to speak to that, being able to speak to white supremacy exists in many forms. So we're using, I know most people have seen that lovely triangle. We're using that in a lot of programs, and we did a lot of focus groups with our Black student organizations. And within that asked, what can we do? And our people of color organizations, but what can we do? And we want to do more, and we should have been doing more before, and we do apologize for that, and we can own that. And we know you might be frustrated with us as well as a result of us not doing more in the past. And we are in a space now where we're here, and we're going to keep being here and keep doing more and do whatever within reason that we can, that you've given us feedback on that you want. So we are doing a Black Talk space. It's called Black Talk. And that's just a drop-in kind of open space for any student that wants to join that. The students that asked for that also gave permission that any student can join that, because they want other students in a safe space with us to be able to learn and gain education from each other and feel safe in doing that. So whether that's white students, Hispanic students, whatever that may look like. And our African American Center has also started doing what's similar to a safe zone training on anti-racism training. So that's something that majority, if not all of the student staff on our campus will be taking that training too. So that's been a nice addition over this summer. But we are going to be very humble, continue to be very humble, and ask for a lot of feedback all the time, as we do already for a lot of our programs already, on what worked, what didn't work, what can we keep doing more of, and did we do anything that made you uncomfortable. So we're in that's kind of the space that we're in right now when it comes to the program, and we'll keep doing more and more. And we'll also own that we're in a city that has a lot of historical racism, a lot of racial trauma has occurred over the years. So that also has an impact on why our Black student population is so tiny to begin with. So that's something I think that impacts every university, what city you're in, and what that history has looked like needs to be considered too.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Building off of that piece, I think acknowledgement goes a long way to begin. And if we're not ready to acknowledge the places where there are room for growth, the places that are pure problematic, I don't see us making progress that is super meaningful or effective. And it really has to start there. I also think about, and by the way, Akuhoi, the Talking Stick, had an awesome article on counter spaces recently with some discussion questions. I think, it's an ongoing act to be anti-racist and to be, or anti-racism, and to really take an active approach to that. And I think we need to do it. So shout out to the article. Definitely consider it. We were just talking about it this week in our unit. But what I anticipate is us needing to do some education of ourselves, doing the work, doing education of our peers, naming instances as it occurs, leaning into challenging conversations. I'm mixed. I identify as a mixed woman and a Black woman. And I recognize the privilege that I hold in certain spaces. And when my voice is being heard, while that experience is valid, I also have a responsibility to recognize when my voice is speaking over others within my community too. And so I think, like I said, the work really starts with that acknowledgement. It starts with us owning where we're at and taking responsibility for the learning we need to do, but it's not enough to learn. We have to take action, we have to be active, and we have to be consistent. It has to matter to us in every situation, every instance of everything that we do within our unit, within our outreach. There can't be holes. And I know that seems like a big ask, and there can't be an excuse for why that doesn't happen. So we need to start and we need to get going. And I think sometimes folks get so caught up and worried about making mistakes or, trying to figure out what to do first. Every moment that we delay is a moment that we are missing out on our opportunity to be better and to show up for our students and for ourselves and our staff, you name it. And so I hope that we're taking responsibility for that. And I hope that we're not navigating out of fear, but in the importance of supporting and showing up for those around us.
Great, thank you. It's hard to believe, but we're already at 1:50. Time flies while you're talking about amazing topics. So want to end with just one final question, and it's going to be kind of like a speed round of sort of a question. And certainly there's extensive time that could be dedicated to this particular, and it's a sweet spot, I think, for me. But for those of you on the panel with either professional staff or student staff reports, how are you preparing to attend to what we anticipate will be heightened needs from them as staff members? And like I said, definitely speed round. So, but yeah, definitely open to share quick insights on that.
I'll just say really quickly, I think giving people permission to say no is going to be incredibly powerful without any punishment, without anything punitive happening. This is too much for me right now. Can't do it. Thanks for creating the safety for me to say no. Moving on to the next thing is going to be really powerful and showing our support. And that means they have emotional safety if they feel that comfortable being able to say, I can't do this. And you'll be surprised about how many people, when they say no, if they feel comfortable saying no, they will say yes majority. And it will still be rare that they do, but I think creating that kind of space where they can just be honest about where they're at is going to be really powerful.
I think remembering to take care of ourselves for those that are especially live-in staff, the importance of remembering that we don't get the opportunity to just go home all the time, and it's kind of on call all the time. So for our student staff as well, to remember that we have to take care of ourselves, and we have to be ready for whatever comes next, because there's a lot that's coming.
Absolutely. I think taking care of yourself was a big one for me as well. And that's sort of demonstrating it through practice and letting our students know that now is the time, as always, to really be prioritizing their needs and their voices. And I think that also really aligns with, in a lot of these conversations where there may be mental health coming up or other topics that may have not been addressed previously, is also being very aware of where we're coming from and being really authentic and open to that learning and that criticism, as well as supporting each other in those spaces and those conversations.
And I'd say, I heard a quote at an Akukai event, nothing about us without us. And I really encourage that. I think in moments where we feel pressed to make decisions, we often don't take time to understand how the decision will impact those who we're making the decision for or about. And so when we have time to slow down and consider the perspectives of those who are impacted, I feel like those decisions generally are more positive. And so it seems like a big ask, but nothing about us without us. It's really important.
Great. So in our final few minutes, would love to invite each of you as panelists to reflect back on our hour together and just share a key takeaway that you'll be taking from today.
I'll start. So one thing that just keeps coming up for me, there's a quote from Bessel van der Kolk, and he's a big deal in the therapist and trauma world. But he says being able to feel safe with other people is probably the single most important aspect of mental health. Safe connections are fundamental to meaningful and satisfying lives. And that's something that we're just going to continue to push a lot around. We have to create safe spaces to have real conversations with people, to be vulnerable, to show our vulnerability. I never ask somebody to share things that I wouldn't also share with them. And that's going to be something, whether that's virtual or in-house, considering emotional safety and physical safety is going to just go such a long way when it comes to supporting a student's mental health.
I think that aligns really well with what I was thinking as well, of just being comfortable with the uncomfortable. That's going to be a really awkward time for a lot of people. And again, as so many people have said, we're not going to be going about our normal practices. And so recognizing that uncomfortable doesn't always mean unsafe. And I really do like that concept about being a safe space for any conversation that may be needing to pop up, or whatever it is that our students are needing, and letting them know that even though this may feel a little bit icky to talk about, and you may be feeling very vulnerable, and vulnerability for a lot of people can be very scary, but to know that they're still safe, they're still here with us, and they won't be judged for anything that they're sharing.
I was going to say that we have a lot of opportunity here. There's a lot of opportunity that is presented before us, and to try new things. I mean, try going out there and doing a new program. Try making connections with students in a different way. Try listening in a different way. Getting feedback in a different way. Doing assessment in a different way. Be okay with some failures too, because those are inevitable and those are going to happen. And really own those, and then move forward. And so really thinking about how we can build resiliency, how we can move forward in our lives, and learn from this opportunity.
And I think it's been a wonderful opportunity to learn from my fellow panelists today. And I think that time that we took to just sit and talk about some stuff, really, we generated a lot of ideas and a lot of pieces to ponder over more in depth and to consider as we make decisions moving forward. And I think that can be replicated within our own units, our own departments. And so I'll be excited to turn around to my home institution and start some of those conversations.
All right, everyone, thank you so much for those final thoughts. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Holly from Okuho'ai.
Great, thank you. Before we end today, a quick reminder that this is the third program in our mental health series. Next week, we'll offer our fourth and final program supporting Black, Indigenous, and/or people of color on our campuses. We hope that many of those on this call will join us next week as we wrap up what has been a really great partnership offering. Again, a big thank you to our panelists and to Chrissy for her fantastic moderation. And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us. On behalf of ACUI, NERSA, and AU CCCO, we look forward to seeing you soon in the virtual space. Take good care. Thank you.